Yes, we thank you for streaming in here on Birds 365. That is Bill Colarulo. He's in for John McMullen today with travel issues getting back from Kansas City. I'm Jody McDonald. That is Big Ben, or at least it looks like that with the clock in the background, or Big Mike Gill, as we like to call him. Mikey G, I know this is like one of the biggest decisions you make every single week, and we put you to the test and the task every week. What kind of T-shirt are we wearing today?
Well, I was at the Naval Academy this weekend, so I have kind of a theme there. I'm going old school Pentagon for the Eagles defense on Monday night, shutting it down to win the game. No college for you, Jody, but okay. I figured Pentagon for the Eagles defense Monday night, be coming up with some big plays. The plays they couldn't get on the ice skating rink in the Super Bowl, they made on a much better surface Monday night.
Wasn't that much better of a surface, though. That weather, I think, played a factor a little bit.
That tells you something, Bill. The fact that it was raining and the surface was still better than what they played on in the Super Bowl.
That's a fair point.
The defense, I thought, listen, Kansas City had some plays to make. They didn't make them. I mean, drops, we know, but how many balls did Mahomes throw where he missed? And you're like, oh, man, he usually makes that throw. He had 3-4 throws where he just missed guys. There was one, the Eagles, look, give them credit. They got some pressure. He runs through the pressure, and he kind of throws off his front foot and just kind of got too much air under it. That looked like a big play. He missed one down in the red zone. He had a couple throws, and I think he got caught on the sideline saying, I got to make that bleeping throw. And he's right. He missed a couple throws in that game. But ultimately, look, I thought the sack from Reddick, the second play of the game, sets the tone that I'm here tonight. I got pressure. They hit him 9 or 10 times in the game. And I thought the defense really showed, hey, when we have to play a big game, Miami, Kansas City, we have it in us still.
Yeah, one of the things that was so impressive, and we've seen it now a few weeks, is Shawn Desai's defense coming out in the second half and being able to shut down teams. Me and Jody were talking about it before you came on. Surprising that the Chiefs were able to run the ball as effectively as they were in the first half. But then you look at what this defense did in the second half. They allowed the Chiefs to go 6 of 8 on third down in the first half. Only 2 of 9 on third down in the second half. How impressed have you been with Shawn Desai in the second half of football games this year?
Well, I tweeted out 4 or 5 weeks ago. I said, don't get used to Shawn Desai. He's going to be gone. I think he's done a really good job for 2 reasons. And it's one of the reasons why I think Brian Johnson has struggled a bit. He has been able to mix the deck up. I mean, he's had, 5, 6, 7 different slot corners. You gave him a new safety. You had how many different safety combinations in the middle of this season? He had one linebacker, lost the linebacker, brought the linebacker back, went back to the other linebacker. So I think Shawn Desai is showing that he's very smart and very adaptable. You know, somebody asked me a question on my show yesterday, and I think the listeners and the viewers would easily answer this question. If Shawn Desai was defensive coordinator in that Super Bowl last year, would the game have been different? And I think a lot of people immediately would say, absolutely. He is very adaptable and willing to change. But I do say that with the caveat of, look, Kansas City had plays to make. They didn't make them. And that's some things that still need to be tightened up there. I mean, you look at the play where MVS gets behind the secondary. I think it's Josh Jobe is lined up on him there. They found a matchup that they liked in that situation. You know, the Kelsey drop, he ends up getting the first down, but on that drive, they finally found a way to start getting him going. You're wondering, where was that earlier in the game for them? Well, I thought the Eagles had a pretty good game plan. Kevin Byard, bracketing, they had a good job of kind of keeping him out. But, yeah, that doesn't mean that he's perfect at this point, but I think he's done a really, really good job.
Yeah, it wasn't Job. It was Bradley Roby. There was one-on-one with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and he just got basically run by, and there's a little luck involved in that. Eagles did a lot of good things and earned and deserved that win, but that drop pass was a little luck shining down on him on a rainy night in Kansas City. Here's what I'll say about Desai. I disagree with me, Mike. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think either of the Eagle coordinators going anywhere. The
It might
two
not
guys,
be this year. It might not be this year.
right? At some point, I do believe he's got a chance. I'm talking this offseason, not just yet on either of the Eagle coordinators. And I'm with you. I think Desai will go first out of the two rather than Brian Johnson. John hates the word adjustments. McMullen hates it. Halftime adjustment. They go into the oranges. That's not making adjustments. They're not in front of a blackboard designing plays. I don't give a flying you know what how it comes about, even if it's just in the gray matter above Shawn Desai's shoulders. He's making adjustments. He's doing things differently. He's calling different type plays that are getting better results in the second half. I'm not going to not give him credit for it just because of a definition of a word. Who cares about how he adjusts, they adjust, the Eagles adjust? They're making adjustments. You can't tell me they're not, because that second half defensive effort was significantly better than the first.
Yeah, and like, you know, whether the players are involved in those conversations, I think the coaches are saying, all right, what do we got to change here in the second half? What's something that they keep doing? You know, I contend, you know, Brian Johnson's getting a lot of heat every single week, it seems like. You know, people want him gone. He's not doing this. He's like, why are you doing that? Calls the bubble screen to the left. Then he calls it to the right. And, you know, I think a lot of what Brian Johnson is dealing with, he's finally getting his feet kind of set in the turf, being a coordinator and calling plays at the NFL level. And then you take Dallas Goedert out of the offense for him and the adjustments he has to make of trying to figure out who are we now? You know, Colin Thompson, who played tight end in the league, was on my show yesterday. So he really watches the tight end spot. And he's saying, look, people look at tight ends as fantasy football players. They want how many catches and yards these guys get. But when you move Goddard from one side to the other, or he's over here, the other team has to have a capable defender figuring out where he is, because he is a capable player. In, you know, Jack Stoll's there. They just don't care what he's doing in the pass game. If he catches a ball, it's for 3 yards. He's not getting a lot. Not to mention what Goddard does in the blocking game. It was evident that the Eagle tight ends on the outside just were not doing the same job, and they were sending pressure from that outside, figuring these tight ends are not going to chip. They're not going to block the same way Dallas Goedert was. But in the second half, I think Brian Johnson, I think that's why you saw bubble screen left, bubble screen right. He said they're sending pressure from the outside. Let's try to bang some bubble screens right past that pressure. He finally put one in his back pocket and hit that little banger over the middle to DeAndre Swift. And it was like, you're going to keep sending pressure. We were going to go do something we haven't shown a whole heck of a lot. So I'm hoping that he's able to kind of find his way through this. And I think fans need to really keep in mind, fans want success on every play. Every play has to be successful. There's so many plays, though, that these guys use as setups. Let me set something up. Even if it doesn't work here, I just want to show we're going to do this. And then I'm going to keep a bunch of plays in my back pocket for that moment. And, you know, I thought the screen to Swift was one of the big plays in that game that kind of busted that pressure up a little bit. And then, you know, Hurts checks out of that play because he sees the matchup in the slot. That's a great job, though, of moving Smith down into the slot there to get that matchup. And what a play by DeAndre or Devonta to make that adjustment there. But, yeah, I think Johnson's got a tougher job of trying to adjust without Goddard right now, as he was just trying to adjust to be a play caller at the NFL.
Nailed it with the tight end position, man. I got a soft spot because I was a tight end. So I like to talk about how they're the most important position on the field. But you're right, with Dallas Goedert, he can block as well as an offensive lineman, and he can catch as well as a wide receiver. It makes it really tough for defenses to try to match up with him. But we're talking about Brian Johnson. We're talking about Shawn Desai. Why do you think Nick Sirianni still doesn't get the respect on the national level that he should get as a head coach? I saw a stat come out yesterday. He's now only the 6th coach since the 1970 merger to lead back-to-back teams to 9-1 starts. And you look at the other names on the list. It's Dungy, Shanahan, Marv Levy, George Seifert, Don Shula, and now Nick Sirianni. And yet he's 5th in Coach of the Year odds. Why does he not get the same respect on the national level?
That's a great question. Usually because you get a team, for instance, Cincinnati Bengals. The first year they do something, you just don't believe in them until they show you. And then this year, everybody took for granted that Cincinnati is going to be a really good team no matter what. They had a couple injuries, 5-5, didn't matter. It wasn't until Joe Burrow finally went down that you're like, all right, I'm out on Cincinnati, even though they weren't playing all that well. I think Detroit's facing that right now, where Detroit, I think a lot of people are starting to believe in Detroit, but it's like, they're Detroit. Do I think they're as good as the Eagles or San Francisco? They're still Detroit. Sirianni's now in the second year. He went to the playoffs, then he goes to the Super Bowl, and you're like, at what point are people going to get past that this was a guy that nobody really knew, had no idea where he came from, had no clue that the Eagles were going to hire this guy? So I think that is kind of interesting. Now, do they look at it as, hey, this team is just so good that anybody can do this? Is it a case in terms of the coach of the year thing? Yeah, this team went to the Super Bowl last year. Why would he be the coach of the year? They were already a good team. Sometimes good coaches fall into that. But I do agree, Bill, that on the national scope, when you mention who are some of the coaches in the NFL, top coaches right now, his name generally does not get mentioned. And I wonder, look, everybody see this video. He's screaming up at the fans. He's yelling at them, see you later, Chiefs fans. I mean, some people could be turned off by his sophomoric way of handling things sometimes. But, hey, I agree. This guy, think about this, though. The game we saw Monday night, Andy Reid, Nick Sirianni, two coaches, when they got hired, you were like, who the hell are these guys? And you look at the two teams that played Monday night, they're almost like the Spider-Man pointing at each other on how they're built. And it's all from Jeffrey Lurie taking a chance on two guys who nobody knew who these guys were and building these teams to really the two best teams in the league. It all started with the Andy hire, and here we are with Nick.
All right, then let me go ahead and get everybody annoyed here since Bill brought it up. The coach not getting his just rewards, and I think that's accurate. I think he is being undersold, undervalued nationally. I think you're right, Mike. I think he annoys some people with his, I'll go, overly emotional rather than sophomoric behavior, but overly emotional, not quite professional enough behavior. You hit the nail on the head there. A lot of people, including Pro Football Focus last week, put out their general manager ratings. Howie Roseman, numero uno, best general manager in the entire National Football League. Nick Sirianni, I think, had something to prove on Sunday. He wanted to beat Andy Reid bad. He knew that he had lost Andy Reid, and the Eagles hadn't beaten Andy Reid, and Andy Reid was the coach as long as he was here in Philadelphia. I think he wanted to win that game badly. He's a competitive guy. John tells us that all the time. He is an uber competitive guy. When does he start competing with Howie Roseman? Because Howie's getting the national love, and Sirianni seems to be getting shortchanged, as Bill just pointed out, I think accurately so, a little bit. Is there any chance for internal issues and one guy getting more credit and one guy getting less credit when they're doing it hand in hand? Is that a potential issue for the Eagles going forward?
I think it's a really smart question. It's fair. And look, this is what ends up happening when teams are good. And you have nothing. I heard you guys talking about, look, the Eagles are 26-2. We actually were talking Monday about this season has kind of been a little boring, but Philadelphia doesn't like to play with expectations. They like to be the underdog. Our favorite seasons are all these seasons that you didn't expect to win. Now we're expecting to win, so you're trying to find things. But I think what you're finding is a very interesting kind of psychology thing here of, hey, I'm not getting the love. It's almost like Tommy Morrison in the Rocky movie. Like, hey, when am I going to get the presses here? What are they giving you all the stuff for? And we haven't seen any, like Sirianni's a kind of an interesting guy. We see him yelling at the crowd, doing all these things. And then he gets to the press conference and he does kind of shuffle himself back to like, coach, one game at a time, yada, yada, yada. But at this point, we have no evidence that that's happening. But I do think it's a smart and fair question of a team that is just kind of having no adversity and fans not being able to cope with. It can't be all bubble gum and peaches over there. There's got to be something bubbling underneath the surface. Until then, everything seems to be good. But I do think that is something that could arise at some point. Who knows? If this team is still riding this wave in the middle of next year, that would be unbelievable, right? I mean, the run that they're on right now, you said it, Bill. This is high school. This is college. The only difference is high school and college, when teams are like this, they're usually winning 45-10. That's the one thing that is a little different about this team is that they're on this run, and it's not the prettiest thing you ever saw.
No, it isn't, but let's hope they can clean it up. Like Jody said, they haven't played a 60-minute game. It'll be scary when they actually start to play 60-minute games, hopefully. But while we're on this
it's not only Jody, Bill. Jalen Hurts said it right after the game.
Yeah.
Look, we still have not played our best ball, and we're 9-1. You go to the Super Bowl champions, Arrowhead, Monday night. They're off the bye, which is another record that's up against you. We talked about Patrick Mahomes had won 14 straight games in November. He was 39-9 or 38-9 entering that game in the month of November and December. Every number was saying they don't lose this game.
Right.
And yet you're not playing your best and you still went in there and won. You're looking up the schedule and saying, I know they play Buffalo and San Francisco, but what numbers am I going to be up against worse than that? So it'll be interesting.
And Reuben Frank over at NBC Sports Philly put out these stats too. It gets even worse. Andy Reid was 62-6 when up by 10 or more at the half, and then 65-8 when leading going into the fourth quarter. And somehow this Eagles team pulled out the victory. But I was about to say, while we're on this love fest, it's the day before Thanksgiving. We talked about Sirianni and Howie Roseman. Got to give some love to Jeffrey Lurie, too, because you mentioned him hiring Andy Reid when nobody knew who he was, hiring Nick Sirianni when nobody knew who he was. He also brought in Dougie P when everyone was saying that was the worst coaching hire of the year. He leads to a Super Bowl. Really, the only guy he hired that turned out to be a disaster was Chip Kelly, and that was the one everybody wanted. That was the only time he kind of went with the guy.
Most popular of any of the coaching hires he made. On the day he was hired, Chip was more popular than anybody else.
Exactly, and that's the only one that was a disaster. It seems to be that Jeffrey Lurie, I know some people say what they want about him, but been a great owner, and one thing he can do, man, is hire head coaches and finding guys that nobody else knows about.
Yeah, well, and the Chip Kelly thing, I remember I was at that press conference when he said, look, we want to be 5 years ahead of being 5 years ahead. I give him credit for taking the shot. It actually worked for a year. He had everybody, the wool pulled for a year, Chip. And then, everybody started to kind of figure it out. And he was kind of a curmudgeon-y guy to deal with. And then the power struggle, which, Jody, you referenced earlier, Chip didn't want Roseman infiltrating any of the decisions. But where Lurie comes back in here is he saw it and said, I'm not going to, this is where GMs sometimes get on my nerves. You draft a guy, he stinks, you keep playing him to justify the draft pick. No, just admit I made a wrong pick. You're not going to get 100% of them right. We'll have more respect for you if you just say I messed up. And Lurie finally pulled the plug before that season even ended. He said, this is not working. I'm getting out of this mess. Let's move on to the next one. So he made the mistake with Kelly. It looked good at the time. It really, he had that second year. The 1 year they were, the third year, they were, 7-9. So they weren't even like a dumpster fire. It was just a mess with him. And then the Roseman and the draft stuff started to get all convoluted. And Lurie, so Lurie recognizes it, gets out. But Lurie in this whole thing, ownership so many times in certain areas when things are bad, Washington comes to mind. Dallas, we know their ownership because it's so high profile in that, they're always really good, but we always feel that the ownership, being the GM, kind of keeps them from getting to that next level from playoff team to Super Bowl team. Jeff Lurie, I think when we look back at this era, he has been one of the premier owners, maybe in all of sports, that doesn't get the attention.
All right. Since we're talking owners and you went to Jerry Jones, I'll ask you this. I've not had a chance to look through and find anyone with a good speculatory opinion on this, so I need a Gill speculatory opinion. It was announced in the last 24 hours that they're going to induct Jimmy Johnson into the Cowboys Ring of Honor. and they're going to do it this season. And people have been wringing their hands about this for years. When is Jerry going to admit that Jimmy did what Jimmy did? And Jerry just kept saying, we're not in a rush. We will get to it. Don't worry about it. Stop asking this question. Blah, blah, blah. And then he not only does it, but he rushes it into a year. Usually they announce this stuff a year in advance so you can schedule it and put it on your calendar and sell a ton of tickets and merchandise. And they're going to do it. And they're going to get it up and done in like 5 weeks. That to me smells of a little desperation that the Cowboys know they got to catch the Eagles and it ain't going to be easy. And they really do believe this is still a year they can win the Super Bowl. Do you read it the same as me, or is this wishful Eagle thinking?
I would probably not go down the same avenue. I would just say,
Okay.
I would say just like everything they do, Jody, lack of attention to details, mismanagement at the upper level. Look, it's perfect. They have great talent. Jimmy Johnson, a great talent. I have great talent. The problem is I don't coach my talent well enough. They are doing something with this great talent in this day that they could have, and they're fumbling it just like they did in the loss against the Eagles. You have something nice, do something smart with it. Don't try to rush it. The lack of attention to detail from that organization is epic. It is just apropos that they would mess something like this up. When they have nice things, they mess it up, and that's why they're the Cowboys of – I'm 46 years old. I saw the 90s, so I do remember them being the team of the 90s. But after that, I mean, I co-host a show a couple days a week, guys in his 30s. He said, I've never seen the Cowboys be relevant ever. So most people in their 30s don't understand why the Cowboys are on the level that they are nationally. And I'm wondering, when our generation has kind of passed, will the younger generation have carried that Cowboys thing through? Are there enough younger people? Because the team's never been good. I mean, for 30 years, the team hasn't been relevant. So is that 30-year group of fans coming through still supporting them like the bandwagoners of the 70s and the 90s?
And you saw it after the game against the Chiefs. All the Eagles fans that are in the stadium start chanting, Dallas sucks, in Kansas City. You're right, though. I mean, we have that hate for Dallas because we knew when they were good. I hope it continues because I love always rooting against Dallas. And let's keep it with Dallas for a second. Thanksgiving Day, as we're about to sit down for dinner, any chance Sam Howell and the Washington Commanders can go into Jerry's world on Thanksgiving as 11-point dogs and knock off the Cowboys?
Yeah, I mean, look, Washington showed they can move the ball. They can put some yardage up, and Dallas has shown they can let their guard down. And look, they had a game last week at Carolina where I don't think anybody thought they were losing that game. So they go and win that game. They blow the Giants out the week before. Are we all of a sudden ready to say that Dallas is consistent enough that they don't let their guard down in a game like this? This is the kind of game where generally they would let their guard down. Hey, we're now back in the conversation. Everybody believes in us again. Do I think it's going to happen? Not necessarily. But your question was, could it? Yeah, this is the classic Dallas has everybody back believing in them. We've blown 2 teams out of the water, and now Thanksgiving, everybody watching, and a Washington team that's basically traded away their defense and is, I guess they're kind of in the wild card race right now, sadly, sneaks up and gets you. But look, Dallas's big thing will be, I think it's going to be interesting, the Dallas-Miami game. These are 2 teams that can't beat anybody of any substance, and they're going to play each other. Somebody has to figure out how to win that game, and that will be the interesting one there. But for me, Detroit's the team with the schedule they have that you have to keep an eye on because they can keep piling up wins. So they're going to keep the pressure on you. San Francisco to an extent, but Detroit's right with you, and their schedule coming up is very manageable that they should only have maybe 1 or 2 more losses left on that schedule. Now, they are Detroit. Are we banking on them to get through this? I think that team's pretty good.
I actually, from an Eagle perspective, a little PO'd at last week's game. They got to lose that game. Chicago, you got to close that out. you let them off the hook. You had them down and you let them off the hook. I think the Lions will actually be better and grow from that game. And, oh, by the way, Cowboys going to win by about 3 touchdowns on Thursday. That's what they do this year. They get bad teams. They beat the snot out of them.
Except for Arizona.
Right. Early in the season, Arizona was the only team. Little did we know Josh Dobbs was going to become Josh Dobbs somewhere else. He was in Arizona that day, and then he's now turned into a world beater in Minnesota. No, I expect the Cowboys will beat the snot out of Washington on Thanksgiving. Sorry, Bill, if that ruins your Thanksgiving Day meal, but get ready for it because I think it's going to happen. All right. Question I asked Bill earlier, you mentioned Sirianni talked about it, a 60-minute game. They mentioned it as soon as the game was over. Do you just put that behind you? You're 9-1. What's more important than just continuing to win games or have to have a game where, and not to impress Jody McDonald, the Bill Colarulo, or Mike Gill, or any of our streaming listeners, no, just for their own psyche, to know that they can have a 60-minute game. How important is it between now and the end of the season? Or do you
we hear a lot about this in the preseason. They got to get a good drive. They got to put together a solid drive, and that's gone out the window. I think this 60-minute thing is only relative if it's necessary. If you need it in that game where the Super Bowl, you had to play a 60-minute game because they were playing at the same level as you were. I think what's interesting about this, I've said really after the Dallas game, everybody tries to search for what's the identity of your team. And I had said for Philadelphia, it's becoming clear that their identity is if you want to beat us, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. You're going to have to do something you don't want to do. And that's the only way you're going to beat us. You're not going to beat us doing what you like to do. If you're going to beat us, fight us. Can they do that? They could do that against Washington and Minnesota and Tampa Bay, New England. They could find ways to beat those teams. But can they do it for 3 straight weeks in January where you're playing? And I think this stretch of games is going to be a good test to find that out. Can we not play our best, but make you uncomfortable enough that even if we're not at our best, you're doing something that you don't like to do? Can they win like that for 3 straight weeks? Can they beat 3 straight playoff teams in that fashion? I think these games, this 5-game stretch, they got one. They get Buffalo this week, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle. If they go 4-1 through this stretch, guys, you got New York, Arizona, and New York. Do we look at this team and say, man, they might go 15-2? I mean, this stretch is going to be so interesting to see, just to me, what their ceiling is. If they can play this style of football, where maybe they're not their best, maybe they're not flashy, but maybe their best is this style, which is we're going to make your style something you don't want to do. Can you play 60 minutes like that? And I think that's who they're trying to be right now. A team that maybe doesn't look great themselves, but drags you down with them.
Yeah, it's been good to watch, but let's hope they can do it in the playoffs for sure. Mike, did you see what Tom Brady said about the NFL being mediocre now? And how the rule changes.
I sure did. Absolutely, yeah.
Rule changes have really hurt because now teams are just looking for penalties and offensive players don't know how to protect themselves anymore. What'd you think about Brady's comments?
I mean, look, again, I'm 46 years old, so I thought he was spot on the money. The game I'm watching now, I feel bad for some of the people that this is the game they're growing up on. It's a terrible game. It's just flags all over the place. I love the announcer a couple weeks ago that said the referees are going to need Tommy John surgery after this game because it's just become a flag fest. It's terrible. I mean, pass interference is just a convoluted disaster. Roughing the quarterback is a disgrace. All these rules, the game, John says it all the time. I totally agree. It's over legislated. I love what Brady said. He put the onus on himself. I don't throw the ball to certain windows because I think that guy's going to get leveled. He said, offensive players need to protect themselves. You can't protect them from the defensive player. What's the defensive player supposed to do? Yeah, I think the league has become very mediocre. And look, we're watching it right now. We're watching teams. Is there a team that jumps off the page that looks like, I'll even go to the 90s Cowboys, Does anybody look like these great Patriots teams that we grew up on? I don't know that any of these teams rival anything we saw 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's unfortunate, but this is the league. It's not turning around. They're not changing anything. This is all safety-based, and we know that.
If I were there when Bill, I didn't see the stuff about Brady. When did he say it on a radio show or
he was
or
on Stephen A. Smith's podcast? Stephen A. Smith.
Did Stephen A. Smith follow up with this question? What happened this offseason that it changed, Tom? Because I don't remember you complaining about it when you were playing. It isn't like Brady's been retired for a decade. He's been retired for 10 minutes, not years. He just got the frig out. So now all of a sudden the NFL sucks and there are too many flags. When you were getting all those calls when
you benefited from
never
them.
really seemed to bother you enough to say something about it when it was helping you win Super Bowls. Come on. How do you let him get away with a statement like, shame on Brady? He just friggin' left and he never bit. He bitched about being asked to hand over his phone. Yeah, I get that with the whole deflate gate, but I don't remember him complaining about refs week in and week out.
And keep in mind, this is coming from a guy who's supposed to be in the Fox booth starting next year, making critical comments of how the league has basically become mediocre. Now you're going to have a spokesman for your league every Sunday with comments saying, what I'm watching is a mediocre product.
Yeah, I'm sure Fox.
He's not wrong, though. He's not wrong.
I like that he referenced Ronnie Lott. I don't think he ever even came close to playing with Ronnie Lott.
I said Ray Lewis. I did hear him say Ray Lewis. You know, he said, oh, those guys, any hit that they would have, every hit tackle they would have made would have been a penalty in today's game. Ray Lewis, I heard. I don't know if I remember live.
Yeah, I think he said Ronnie Lott, Ray Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom. Don't need to hear from you. When you get if he does it, when he's in the Fox booth, I'll give him some credit for that because that's nervy. That's that's spitting in your employer's eye. That I'll give him credit for. If he goes down that road during a game on Fox, then I'll go.
There was some TMZ. There was some TMZ video of him, I guess, this weekend with Aaron Andrews and one of the Fox executives. So they must have been in a bunker somewhere, maybe doing a practice run of Eagles Chiefs, maybe.
Unfortunately, we're not going to have that one for a couple of years, but it was a big-time rivalry win for the Eagles. All right, Mike, before we let you on, Mike Gill, yesterday, or I should say Monday, the return of the big play from DeAndre Swift. He had a bunch of games in a row where week 2, he rushed for 6 yards per carry. Week 3 against Tampa, he was over 8 yards per carry. The last 6 weeks, 4.0, 4.1, 1.8, 4.1, 3.6, 2.4, 6.3 the other night, yards per carry on DeAndre Swift. Why did he kick back in gear?
That's a good question. It all of a sudden, and because the offensive line did not have a great night in pass protection, he looked like he had a little extra burst there. I think the Eagles have, to some extent, look, he's got more touches this year than he's ever had in his career. I think there is the element of you've got to kind of limit his pitch count a little bit. You know, this is a guy who's had a ton of injury issues in his past. So even if he's rocking and rolling, I thought he looked really had a good burst, looked really quick the other night. They still seem like they want to hold him to that 12 to 15 area. It's like, hey, we can't give him 18 to 20. That's just too many for him. But for whatever reason, I don't have the answer because it's interesting. We talked about the tight end, Goddard, how big he is in the block, in blocking in the run game. For him to get that extra burst and get those extra yards, I thought was a big positive. Now, early in the game, they did have a quarterback sweep call that they ran. It looked like a called third down where he took off. Could that have just been enough to open up some RPO things that they thought maybe Hurts? So you run it early and then put that in your mind. Hey, Hurts ran that sweep early in the game, so they have to account for him. That could have just been enough to get him rocking and rolling.
That's what John and I have been saying for weeks now. That when you don't have the +1 aspect of the Eagles rushing game and the threat of Jalen taking off, just gives the defense one less thing to worry about, and then they can zero in on the back, and it does cut into his yards. I agree wholeheartedly with you. I thought you were going there. I was hoping you went there. You're a smart man, Mike Gill. MG, always a pleasure. Appreciate it. We will get you up here again next week. Wednesday. We wait with bated breath for the T-shirt selection.
I'm running out of shirts, man. I'm running out of shirts. The people watching, you got to send me some
stuck up. Yeah, I was going to say, Mike Gill needs T-shirts. For those of you who want to make a statement, Pentagon, he went Pentagon today. You want to make a statement, send your T-shirts to Mike Gill at the Sports Bash 97.3. What town is that in down there?
Our building's in Northfield, 950 Tilton Road, Northfield, if you want to mail me a shirt, all right?
950 Tilton Road. Hopefully you wrote that down. That would be XL, by the way. Not a little guy, Mike Gill, so make sure it's XL. Mike, always a pleasure. Thanks, bud.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Yes, same to you. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there, Mike Gill included, but to everyone. Because, yeah, this is our last show. We got an hour left to play. We're going to punch up Brian Cameron from Philly Sports Network in about 20 minutes. But, yeah, we're going to be off on Thanksgiving like everybody else. So, yes, happy Thanksgiving. We still got plenty more to talk about here on Birds 365, so keep it right here.